The following case file is a fictional crime story crafted for entertainment. Characters, locations, and events are imagined and not connected to any real individuals or incidents. This narrative includes mature themes involving crime and investigation. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Nothing shown or described should be interpreted as encouragement or instruction for illegal activity.
They called it an abandoned building, a forgotten place no one cared about anymore. But on a rain-soaked night in Harbor City, one unlocked door and a trail of blood pulled a beat cop into a case powerful people had spent years trying to erase. Her name was Mara Hale, and before this night was over, the city would quietly mark her as a problem. Before the story begins, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. These Midnight Casefiles take time to research and craft, and your support helps keep these stories alive. Now, let's begin. The rain had been falling since before sunset, not in sudden storms or violent bursts, but in a steady, unrelenting rhythm that soaked into everything it touched. It clung to the streets, darkened brick walls, and turned the city's neon lights into long, trembling reflections that stretched across the asphalt like broken glass. Harbor City always looked quieter in the rain, calmer, as if the water softened its edges and washed away its sins. Mara Hale knew better. She stood beneath a flickering streetlight near the edge of the harbor district, rain tapping against the brim of her patrol cap, shoulders relaxed but alert. Her cruiser idled behind her with the engine humming low, headlights dimmed, emergency lights off. She preferred it that way. Flashing lights drew attention. Silence revealed things people didn't want seen. The call had come in 10 minutes earlier. Noise complaint. Anonymous. No callback number. No description beyond metal sounds coming from inside. Dispatch had read it out with the bored cadence reserved for calls that usually ended with an unfounded report and a quick return to patrol. Most officers wouldn't even get out of the car. But the address had made Mara slow down. Riley's Auto Repair. The building sat at the edge of her beat like a bad memory no one wanted to talk about. Closed for nearly a decade. No utilities, no permits, no active business license. On paper, it still existed. In reality, it had been abandoned long before Mara ever wore a badge. She'd driven past it hundreds of times over the years, watched ivy crawl higher up its brick walls, watched nearby businesses open, fail, and disappear, watched graffiti bloom everywhere, except its doors. No squatter stayed long, no vandals tagged it, no one lingered. The place felt avoided. Mara crossed the street slowly, boots splashing through shallow puddles. The building loomed low and wide, its exterior darkened by rain, boards nailed unevenly over most of the windows. Some were cracked, some warped, but all of them intact. The faded sign above the door sagged under its own rusted weight, one letter hanging by a single bolt, clinking softly in the wind. She reached for the handle. It turned easily. Unlocked. That made her pause. Abandoned buildings in Harbor City were usually sealed tight, chains, padlocks, welded doors, or caved-in entrances. An unlocked door meant someone wanted access, or didn't care who found it. Mara took a steady breath, resting her hand near her holster, and pushed the door inward. The hinges creaked softly. Inside, the smell hit her immediately. Old oil and rust were expected. Every mechanic shop smelled like that long after it closed, but beneath it lingered something sharper, metallic, sour, a smell Mara recognized from years on the job. Blood. Her flashlight snapped on, cutting a narrow beam through thick dust that floated lazily in the air, undisturbed. Tool benches lined the walls, frozen in time. Wrenches and sockets still hung where someone had left them years ago, coated in grime. A stripped engine block sat on a lift near the center of the shop, half disassembled, like a body abandoned mid-autopsy. There were no signs of people living there, no mattresses, no trash piles, no footprints. Too clean. Mara moved slowly, sweeping her flashlight across corners and doorways, listening to the sound of her own breathing. Her boots echoed faintly against the concrete, the noise swallowed by the wide, hollow space. She rounded a support pillar near the back and stopped. Blood streaked across the floor. Not splattered, not pooled, dragged. Dark, uneven smears cut across the concrete, broken in places where someone had struggled. The marks told a story without words. Someone had been hurt badly here. Someone had tried to resist. Someone hadn't walked out on their own. Mara crouched, gloved fingers hovering inches above the stains. The edges were dry, cracked slightly, but the center still held a dull sheen that reflected her flashlight. Recent. She exhaled slowly and reached for her radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Hale. I'm inside the structure at Riley's Auto. Possible assault scene. Requesting backup." The response crackled back after a pause that felt longer than it should have been. Units were tied up across the district. Estimated response time was unclear. She acknowledged calmly and clicked the radio off. Waiting wasn't always safer. Sometimes it just gave people time to clean up. She stood and followed the blood trail deeper into the building. The air grew colder as she neared the back office, damp and heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. A chair lay upturned near the doorway, one leg snapped clean. Papers littered the floor, old invoices and work orders, yellowed and brittle, curling at the edges. Mara swept her flashlight across the far wall. Her chest tightened. Spray-painted in black, partially hidden beneath peeling paint, was a symbol, a serpent coiled tightly around a crown. The lines were steady, deliberate, confident. This wasn't graffiti. It was a signature. Mara stared at it longer than she meant to. 6 months earlier, she'd responded to a call under Pier 9. A dock worker named Luis Ortega had been found dead in the water, face down, arms tangled in rope. The official ruling had been accidental drowning, but the bruises on his wrists and throat told a different story. She remembered kneeling on the wet concrete that night, rain stinging her eyes, noticing something faint carved near the body. The same serpent, the same crown. She'd written it in her report. The report came back edited. She'd asked her supervisor about it. He'd told her to stop chasing ghosts. Now, the ghost was staring back at her from a wall no one was supposed to enter. Mara photographed the symbol carefully, different angles, different distances. She noted the chipped paint around it, the fresh flecks scattered on the floor. This wasn't random vandalism. It was a message meant for someone who knew how to read it. She stepped out through a side door into the alley, rain pouring harder here, washing the pavement clean. The blood trail continued briefly, then vanished near a storm drain. The metal grate was bent inward, bolts snapped clean off. Forced. Mara aimed her flashlight into the darkness below. The beam barely reached the bottom before the rushing water swallowed it. The sound echoed loudly, carrying everything away. A body had gone down there. She straightened slowly, rain dripping from her cap, the weight of the moment settling deep in her chest. If she reported this the wrong way, it would disappear. Filed as vandalism, logged as unfounded, closed quietly, just like Ortega. Backup arrived nearly 20 minutes later. 2 officers. Both looked tired. One barely stepped inside the shop before shrugging. "Probably transients," he muttered. Mara didn't argue. She documented everything herself. Measurements, photos, observations, details others dismissed. That night should have ended there. It didn't. Over the next several days, Mara couldn't shake the feeling that she'd crossed into something she wasn't supposed to see. She began noticing patterns she'd ignored before. Doc-related calls rerouted, reports reassigned mid-process, certain names appearing briefly in files, then vanishing. She closed her notebook late one night, rain tapping softly against her apartment window, knowing one thing with unsettling clarity. This wasn't just a case. It was a system, and systems didn't like being noticed. Mara didn't talk about the auto shop. Not to her partner, not to the other officers on her shift, not even to herself out loud. She wrote everything down instead. Every detail she could remember went into a small black notebook she kept hidden beneath the spare tire in her trunk. Times, smells, angles, the way the serpent symbol had been painted, not rushed, not sloppy, but calm, as if whoever had drawn it knew they had all the time in the world. The notebook became her anchor. If the case disappeared on paper, it wouldn't disappear in her head. The city returned to its routine almost immediately. Traffic stops, noise complaints, domestic disputes that ended with slammed doors and hollow apologies. Mara worked her beat the same way she always had, quiet, observant, patient. But something had changed. She felt it in the pauses between radio calls, in the way conversations stopped when she entered a room. At the precinct, Riley's auto repair was already being treated like it had never mattered. The incident report was still open, technically, but it had been reassigned twice in 3 days. First to property crimes, then to a general investigations pool where cases went to wait until someone forgot about them. Mara noticed. She also noticed that no one asked her questions about it. That bothered her more than open resistance would have. Late one evening, after her shift officially ended, she stayed behind and headed for the records room. The overhead lights hummed softly as she logged in, pulling archived files that hadn't been accessed in years. She filtered by location first: Harbor District, dock-adjacent properties, industrial zones. The screen filled with case numbers. Too many. She opened one at random. A warehouse fire from 4 years ago. Cause listed as electrical failure. No injuries. Total loss written off by insurance within days. The property had been purchased less than a month earlier by a company with no listed employees. She checked another. A missing persons report. Dock worker. Disappeared after a late shift. No witnesses. No follow-up after 30 days. Another. Assault with a deadly weapon. Victim refused to cooperate. Case closed. Mara leaned back in her chair, eyes scanning the screen, patterns beginning to form. These weren't connected by names or methods. They were connected by geography, by timing, by how quickly they vanished. Someone was keeping the surface calm, and they were very good at it. She copied what she could, not files, those left trails, but notes, names, addresses, company registrations. She wrote quickly, carefully, committing as much as possible to memory. She didn't notice the figure in the doorway until the chair across from her shifted slightly. Mara looked up. Sergeant Wilkes stood there, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Working late?" he said. "Paperwork," Mara replied easily. Wilkes nodded slowly, eyes drifting to the screen. "You know those files are old." "Still open," she said. "For a reason." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. When he left, Mara logged out immediately. She waited a full minute before standing, listening to the hum of the lights, the distant echo of voices down the hall. She left without looking back. The docks were busier at night. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was how orderly everything looked when you stopped watching it like a cop and started watching it like someone who didn't belong. Mara parked her cruiser a block away and walked the rest of the distance in her jacket, zipped up, hands in her pockets. She bought coffee from a vendor who stayed open past midnight, the kind of man who asked no questions and remembered faces. She leaned against a railing and listened. Dock workers complained when they thought no one important was around, about supervisors who never showed up, about manifests that didn't match the cargo, about trucks that arrived empty and left heavy. She heard the word again. Serpent. always said with a laugh, always followed by a shrug, like joking made it safer. Mara walked the length of Pier 9, stopping where Luis Ortega had been found. The concrete had been smoothed down since then, the faint carving erased completely. The water below was dark and opaque, swallowing reflections whole. Someone had died here, and no one had pushed. She stayed longer than she should have, long enough to notice the same dark sedan idling at the far end of the pier that she'd seen near Riley's auto days earlier, long enough to see it pull away slowly when she turned in its direction. No rush, no threat, just acknowledgement. Back at the precinct the next day, her patrol routes changed. It wasn't announced, it wasn't explained. She was simply reassigned away from the docks and industrial district, pushed deeper into residential areas, safer areas, quieter areas. Mara didn't protest. She adapted. She started using her off hours differently. Instead of going home, she drove, past warehouses, past logistics firms, past buildings owned by companies that existed only on paper. One name kept appearing, a shipping firm operating from the industrial corridor. No public complaints, no violations, clean inspections every time. Too clean. She parked across the street and watched one night. Trucks arrived after midnight, no logos, no plates she could read clearly. Guards at the gate didn't carry themselves like private security. They stood straighter, more alert. Military alert. She wrote everything down. 2 nights later, her locker was open when she arrived for her shift. Nothing missing, nothing disturbed, just open. A message without words. That same night, a sealed envelope waited on her desk. No return address. Inside was a single photocopy of an old incident report, Luis Ortega, her original version, unedited. Someone wanted her to remember, or someone wanted her scared. Mara folded the paper carefully and slipped it into her jacket. She didn't react, she didn't ask questions, she worked her shift like nothing had happened. But she understood now. This wasn't about one assault or one body. It was about control, about roots and silence, and keeping the right people invisible. And someone had decided she was standing too close to the edge. As she drove home that night, the dark sedan followed her again. 3 blocks, 4. Then it turned off smoothly, like it had never been there at all. Mara parked outside her apartment and sat in the car long after the engine stopped, rain tapping softly against the windshield. She wasn't afraid. Not yet. But she knew the rules had changed. This case wasn't waiting to be solved. It was waiting to see how far she'd go and whether she'd stop on her own.
Mara learned quickly that the city had more than one way of saying stop. Sometimes it reassigned your cases, sometimes it moved you to quieter streets, and sometimes it spoke through people who had nothing left to lose. The call came in near the end of her shift, not through dispatch, not through official channels. Her phone buzzed once while she sat in her cruiser at a red light, rain streaking down the windshield. An unknown number, no message, just a location ping dropped onto her screen. Pier 12, 20 minutes, come alone. Mara stared at the phone for a long moment. She could ignore it. That would be the smart move. Any cop with half a brain knew better than to follow anonymous messages into dock territory after midnight. But the case had stopped pretending to be patient. She made the turn. Pier 12 sat farther from the tourist side of the harbor, where the lights thinned and the water smelled heavier. Cargo cranes loomed overhead like skeletal arms frozen mid-reach. The wind off the water carried the low groan of metal and the distant slap of waves against concrete. Mara parked with her headlights off and stepped out, jacket zipped, hand resting near her belt.
She didn't call it in. She didn't want this logged. A figure stood near the edge of the pier, half hidden in shadow. He was thin, older than he should have been for dock work, his shoulders slumped forward like he was permanently bracing for impact. When he saw Mara approach, he flinched. "You're the cop," he said quietly. "Depends who's asking," Mara replied. He gave a dry, humorless laugh. "Figures." He glanced over his shoulder, then back at her. "They said you wouldn't come." "Who's they?" "The ones who don't want this place remembered." That got her attention. He told her his name was Eli Mevaro. He worked nights cleaning storage units along the harbor. Not officially employed. Paid cash, no records. "I saw things," he said. "Didn't understand them at first. Trucks showing up with nothing on the books, containers moved twice, guards that didn't ask questions." "Why call me?" Mara asked. Eli swallowed hard. "Because I saw your name once on a report that wasn't supposed to exist." He told her about a room beneath one of the warehouses, not on any blueprint, a place where containers sat for hours before moving inland. He told her about a man who went in once and didn't come out. "And the symbol?" Mara asked. Eli nodded immediately. Serpent, crown, always there. Mara listened, didn't interrupt, didn't promise anything. "Why now?" she asked. Eli's hands shook. "Because they asked me to clean something tonight." Mara's stomach tightened. "What kind of something?" "Blood," he said. The sound of an engine echoed down the pier. Eli's head snapped up. "That's them." Mara grabbed his arm. "Where?" But he was already backing away, panic flashing across his face. "I shouldn't have called. I shouldn't have—" The headlights appeared at the far end of the pier. Eli ran. Mara followed instinctively, boots pounding against wet concrete. The truck accelerated, engine roaring as it cut across the pier to block them off. Gunfire cracked through the night. Mara dove behind a cargo container, pulling her weapon free. She yelled commands that vanished into the wind. The truck screeched to a halt, doors flying open. Then, silence. By the time backup arrived, the truck was gone. So was Eli. All that remained was a smear of blood near the pier's edge and a single dropped item crushed beneath a tire track. Eli's phone. The official report labeled the incident inconclusive. No suspects, no victim found, no further action recommended. Mara stared at the words on the screen and felt something inside her harden. The next day, Internal Affairs requested a meeting. They asked her why she'd been near Pier 12 off-duty, why she hadn't called for backup, why her name kept appearing in connection with dock-related incidents. Mara answered carefully, truthfully, without giving them more than they already knew. They warned her about overstepping. They reminded her of her position. Beat cop, limited authority, clear boundaries. She left the room knowing she was officially marked. That night, she went back to the warehouse Eli had mentioned. She didn't go inside. She didn't need to. The serpent symbol had been freshly painted near a loading bay door, still wet, still shining beneath the security lights. A warning, or a challenge. Mara stood across the street, rain soaking into her jacket, and understood something with painful clarity. This case wasn't just dangerous, it was protected, and if she kept going, the city wouldn't stop her. It would sacrifice her. She turned away from the warehouse and drove home slowly, carefully, checking her mirrors more than she liked. In her apartment, she laid everything out on the table: photos, notes, times, locations, and Eli's phone. It had been smashed, but not completely destroyed. The screen flickered when she powered it on. One unread message sat in the inbox, a video attachment. Mara hesitated, then pressed play. The footage was shaky, filmed in low light. Containers, men arguing, a voice shouting orders, and in the background, clear as day, the serpent painted on the wall. Mara shut the phone off and leaned back in her chair. This wasn't just evidence. This was leverage, and for the first time since Riley's auto repair, she allowed herself to feel it. Fear, not the kind that makes you run, the kind that tells you you're standing exactly where you're not supposed to be. Mara didn't sleep the night she watched the video. She sat at her small kitchen table until dawn, the phone lying face up beside her notebook like a loaded weapon. She replayed the footage again and again, slowing it down, pausing on faces that never fully came into focus, on voices that blurred into each other beneath the echo of the warehouse. The serpent symbol was always there, painted cleanly on the wall behind the men, bold, unhidden, as if it didn't need to be. That was what scared her the most. By morning, she'd copied everything she could from the phone onto a flash drive. She labeled it with a date, sealed it in an evidence bag she'd borrowed from the precinct weeks ago, and hid it inside the lining of her jacket. Then she went to work. The precinct felt different that day. Not louder, not hostile, just tighter. Conversations stopped a beat too early. Eyes lingered a second too long. Even the air felt heavier, like the building itself was bracing. Mara filed her reports carefully. Neutral language, no accusations, no conclusions, just facts, locations, times, observations. She submitted them through proper channels. By lunch, 2 of them had been reassigned. By the end of her shift, 1 had been marked incomplete. She checked the system twice, thinking it had to be a mistake. It wasn't. When she asked the desk sergeant, he didn't meet her eyes. "Probably a clerical issue," he said. "It'll sort itself out." It didn't. The following day, Internal Affairs called again. This time, they didn't pretend it was routine. They asked about the phone, about the flash drive, about why she was collecting evidence outside her assigned scope. Mara felt the room closing in as they spoke, not aggressively, not loudly, calmly, methodically. "You're a beat cop, Officer Hale," one of them said. "You're not authorized to conduct independent investigations into organized crime." "I responded to a call. I followed what I found." "And now you're finding more than you're supposed to," the other added. They advised her, politely, professionally, to step back. "For your own safety," they said. Mar left the room with a warning in her file. Unspoken, but unmistakable. That night, the warehouse burned. The fire broke out just after midnight. Electrical, according to the first reports. By the time Mara arrived on scene, flames were already eating through the roof, smoke billowing into the sky. She recognized the address immediately. Eli's warehouse. Fire crews worked fast, but there wasn't much to save. The building collapsed inward, metal screaming as it twisted and gave way. By morning, it was nothing but charred beams and wet ash. Official cause, faulty wiring. Mara stood behind the police tape, rain soaking through her jacket, watching evidence turn to smoke. Someone had moved quickly. Too quickly. Back at the precinct, she tried to access the warehouse files. They were gone. Not locked, not restricted. Gone. She checked the audit logs. Her access request wasn't even recorded. That was when it hit her fully. This wasn't just resistance. This was sabotage. Someone with authority was actively erasing the case. Mara drove home in silence, hands tight on the wheel. The city lights blurred past her windshield, reflections stretching into meaningless lines. She didn't go inside when she reached her apartment. Instead, she sat in the car and called the only person she trusted enough to risk it, Detective Rowan Blake. He'd been the one to train her years ago, the one who told her that good cops didn't chase glory, they chased patterns. He'd gone quiet recently, pulled off major cases, pushed into administrative work. She left a message. "I need you, and I need you to listen." He called back an hour later. "Stop. Whatever you're doing, stop." Mara closed her eyes. "You know, don't you?" There was a long pause on the line. "I know enough, and I know you're standing in front of something that chews people up. I have evidence. then hide it. People are getting hurt. So will you. The line went dead. 2 days later, Mara's locker was searched. This time, things were missing. Her notebook was gone, so were the copies she'd kept of her early reports. She stood there staring into the empty space, heart pounding, knowing exactly what that meant. They were done pretending. That night, she returned to Riley's auto repair. Not officially, not in uniform. She parked 3 blocks and walked the rest, hood pulled low, hands cold despite the humidity. The building looked unchanged, but she noticed the new padlock immediately. Someone didn't want it entered again. Mara circled the back and slipped through a broken window she'd memorized months ago. Inside, the air smelled cleaner. Too clean. The bloodstains were gone, the office had been repainted, the serpent symbol had been scrubbed away so thoroughly it left a pale ghost on the wall. But they'd missed something. Behind a loose panel near the back office, she found it. A ledger. Names, dates, container numbers, payments logged in neat columns. Mara's hands trembled as she flipped through it. This wasn't street crime. This was infrastructure, and someone made a mistake. As she photographed the pages, footsteps echoed outside. Voices. Too calm, too close. Mara killed her flashlight and held her breath. A beam swept across the room. Another followed. Clear, someone said. They weren't cops. Mara waited until the voices faded, then slipped out the way she came, heart hammering so hard it hurt. She didn't go home. She drove straight to a public storage facility and rented a unit in cash. She sealed the ledger and the flash drive inside a lockbox and shoved it behind stacked crates. Only then did she breathe. This case had crossed a line, not because of what it revealed, but because of who was trying to keep it buried. Mara sat in her car afterward, watching dawn creep into the sky, and made a decision she knew she couldn't undo. She wasn't stepping back, she was stepping deeper, and if the apartment wouldn't protect the truth, she would.
Mara kept the storage unit a secret, even from herself. She didn't write down the address, didn't save it in her phone. She drove there only at odd hours, taking different routes each time, parking a block away and walking the rest. The lockbox stayed buried behind stacked crates, wrapped in plastic, hidden beneath things no one would bother to move. Evidence didn't matter if you didn't live long enough to use it. The city, meanwhile, pretended nothing was wrong. The warehouse fire faded from the news cycle in less than 24 hours. A small article blamed outdated wiring and budget cuts. No mention of missing files. No mention of Eli Navarro. Riley's auto repair remained boarded up, quiet, invisible again. At the precinct, Mara felt the distance grow. She was no longer reassigned. She was ignored. Her calls were answered last. Her reports sat unread. Supervisors spoke to her in vague reminders and carefully neutral tones. No one told her to stop anymore. They just acted like she didn't exist. That worried her more than open hostility ever could. The first real threat came on a Tuesday. She found it when she got home from a double shift, exhausted, uniform still damp with sweat and rain. Her apartment door was unlocked. Mara froze in the hallway, hand instinctively moving toward her weapon. She hadn't forced the lock. She never did. The door stood slightly ajar, the way it had been when she left that morning. She stepped inside slowly. Nothing looked disturbed at first. Couch, table, kitchen, all where they belonged. Then she saw the wall. Pinned above her kitchen table with a single nail was a photograph. Luis Ortega. Not the one from the case file. This was newer, taken from a distance. Ortega standing on the docks, mid-conversation, unaware he was being watched. The edges of the photo were clean, the paper uncreased. On the back, written in black marker, was a single line. Some things are better left underwater. Mara didn't call it in. She removed the photo, bagged it, and checked every room, every window, every corner. Whoever had been there hadn't rushed. They hadn't taken anything. They just wanted her to know. That night, she slept with the lights on and her gun within reach. The second warning came 2 days later. Mara's younger brother, Evan, worked nights at a shipping supply warehouse across town. It wasn't connected to the docks officially, but close enough that trucks passed through constantly. She got the call just before midnight. Evan had been hurt. Not badly, not enough to make headlines. A fall, according to his supervisor, slipped on a loading ramp, hit his head. When Mara reached the hospital, Evan was sitting up in bed, pale but conscious, a bandage wrapped around his forehead. "It was weird," he said quietly once they were alone. "The ramp was dry, and there was this guy, watching." "Did you get a look at him?" Mara asked. Evan shook his head. "Just his shoes, clean, like he didn't work there." Mara felt the room tilt slightly. This wasn't coincidence. This was escalation. She didn't tell Evan what she was working on. She didn't need to. He saw it in her face anyway. "Are you in trouble?" he asked. "I'm handling something," she said. "Don't," he replied immediately. "Whatever it is, don't." Mara squeezed his hand and said nothing. The message was clear. The case was no longer contained to her. That night, Mara went back to the storage unit. She retrieved the ledger and spread it out on the metal table beneath a flickering bulb. For the first time, she didn't just skim, she studied. Names repeated, payment schedules lined up with shipping arrivals, container numbers matched dates from missing persons reports. It wasn't random, it was organized. She cross-referenced what she could from memory, mapping routes in her head. One name appeared again and again, initials, not full signatures, but consistent. RB. Mara's stomach tightened. Rowan Blake. She stared at the letters for a long time before forcing herself to breathe again. It didn't mean guilt, it meant proximity, and proximity was dangerous. She needed confirmation. Carefully, quietly, she started asking questions the only way she could now, off the clock, off the record. She talked to an old dispatcher who owed her a favor, an old retired dock inspector who drank too much and talked even more, a clerk who remembered contracts no one else did. The picture sharpened. Someone high enough to redirect cases, someone trusted enough not to be questioned, someone who knew how investigations worked and how to stop them. Mara didn't confront Blake, not yet. She did, however, start copying everything. Redundancy became survival. She split the evidence into pieces, hid them in separate places. If one disappeared, another would remain. The third warning came the following weekend. Her car wouldn't start. When the tow truck arrived, the driver frowned under the hood. "Fuel line's been sliced," he said. "Clean cut." Not an accident. Mara thanked him, watched the car get hauled away, and stood alone on the sidewalk as dusk settled over the city. They weren't trying to kill her. They were reminding her they could. That night, she received a call from a number she didn't recognize. She answered. A man's voice spoke calmly on the other end, too calm. "You've been busy," he said. Mara said nothing. "The smart thing to understand when," the voice continued, "is to stop." "People are dead," Mara replied. "Yes, and more will be if you let this go." The line went dead. Mara stood there in the dark, phone pressed to her ear, pulse steady. Fear finally arrived then, not loud, not paralyzing, but heavy. This case wasn't going to end quietly, and it wasn't going to end without cost. She drove to the precinct and sat in her car for a long time, watching officers come and go, wondering who she could trust. The answer came uninvited. Detective Lena Ortiz stepped out of the building and stopped when she saw Mara. Ortiz had a reputation for being relentless and inconvenient. She'd been sidelined more than once for asking the wrong questions. She walked over. "You look like hell," Otis said. "Funny," Mara replied. "I was thinking the same thing." Ortiz leaned against the hood of the cruiser. "You're poking something big, aren't you?" Mara hesitated. Then she nodded once.
Ortiz sighed. Good, because I think someone's trying to bury a case I worked 3 years ago, and it smells a lot like your docs. They stood there in silence for a moment, the city humming around them. Two problems had just found each other. Mara finally felt something she hadn't allowed herself yet. Hope. Small, fragile, but real.
Mara didn't trust hope. Hope made people careless. It made them talk too much, move too fast, believe they were safer than they were. Still, when Detective Lena Ortiz stood beside her cruiser that night, arms crossed, eyes sharp, something loosened in Mara's chest. Not relief, alignment. They didn't talk long in the open. Ortiz tilted her head toward the street, a silent suggestion. Mara nodded and drove first, keeping it casual, leading them toward a diner that never closed and asked no questions. They took a booth in the back. Coffee arrived without being ordered. Ortiz didn't waste time. 3 years ago, she said quietly, I was chasing a weapons diversion case, military-grade inventory disappearing on paper, showing up on the street. Every trail ran cold right before it got interesting. Mara listened. I pushed too hard, Ortiz continued. Internal affairs got involved. Files vanished, witnesses recanted. I was reassigned to cold cases and told to be grateful I still had a badge. And the docs? Mara asked. Ortiz nodded once. Always the docs. They shared what they had, carefully, not everything, not yet. Names were spoken once and written nowhere. Dates were cross-checked from memory. Routes overlapped. Patterns aligned. By the time they stood to leave, the case had shape, and shape gave it weight. That weight followed Mara home. 2 nights later, the storage unit was hit. Mara knew the moment she turned onto the access road. The gate stood open when it shouldn't have been. The security light near her unit flickered, then died completely. She didn't rush in. She parked, killed the engine, and listened. Nothing. Too quiet. Her gun was in her hand when she approached, footsteps light, heart steady. The lock hung broken from the unit door, cleanly cut. Inside, the shelves had been pulled apart, boxes ripped open, papers scattered across the concrete floor. Someone had been looking for something specific. They hadn't found it. The lockbox was gone. Mara stood there for a long moment, the hum of the facility filling her ears, and felt the anger arrive. Not hot, not reckless, but cold and precise. They were done warning her. They were trying to disarm her. She called Ortiz from the car. They found one of my caches, Mara said. Ortiz swore softly. Then we move. How? We stop playing defense. They met again an hour later, this time in Ortiz's apartment. No phones, no electronics, windows closed, curtains drawn. Mara laid out what was left, photos backed up elsewhere, notes copied twice, a partial list of names, routes, the ledger entries she'd memorized. Ortiz filled in gaps with her own memory, a shipping contractor she'd questioned years ago, a supervisor who quietly retired after an internal review that never went public. It's bigger than we thought, Ortiz said finally, but not untouchable. Mara looked up. Then we force it into the light. The chance came sooner than either of them expected. A truck jackknifed on the freeway just after midnight 2 days later, spilling cargo across 3 lanes. Officially, it was an accident. Unofficially, the container had been on Ortiz's radar for years. Weapons. Mara arrived on scene before command could lock it down. She didn't flash authority. She didn't interfere. She observed. And she photographed everything. By morning, the story hit the news. Grainy images, confused reporting, too many unanswered questions. The department scrambled, and that scramble exposed cracks. Internal emails leaked, conflicting statements surfaced, supervisors contradicted each other publicly. Someone panicked. That someone made a mistake. Mara got the call from Ortiz at dawn. They're moving tonight, Ortiz said. Final shipment. They're trying to clear house. Mara didn't ask how she knew. She trusted her. They split up. Ortiz went through official channels, slow and loud, forcing attention where it wasn't wanted. Mara went quiet.
She drove to the industrial corridor and parked far enough away to walk. The warehouse lights burned bright against the dark sky. Guards moved with urgency now, no longer pretending. Mara slipped closer, staying in shadow, documenting what she could. Then she heard the gunshot. It echoed sharp and loud, cutting through the night. Mara ran. Inside the warehouse, chaos had already begun. Men shouted, someone screamed. A figure lay on the ground near the loading bay, blood pooling beneath them. Mara ducked behind a forklift as another shot rang out. This wasn't intimidation anymore. This was cleanup. She caught a glimpse of the shooter, calm, methodical, moving with purpose, not street muscle, professional. Mara moved when she saw her opening. She tackled him from the side, the impact knocking the gun loose. They hit the concrete hard. Pain flared through her shoulder, but she held on. The struggle was brief and brutal. When it was over, the man lay handcuffed on the floor, breathing hard, eyes flat. "You don't know what you're breaking," he said. Mara stood, chest heaving. "Then explain it." Sirens wailed in the distance. Backup arrived fast this time. Too fast. As officers swarmed the scene, Mara caught sight of a familiar face near the perimeter. Rowan Blake. He stood apart from the others, watching her, expression unreadable. Their eyes met. Nothing was said, but everything was understood. The arrested man was transferred within the hour. By morning, he was gone, released due to procedural errors. The warehouse was sealed, and the case was officially reassigned. Again. Mara sat on the steps outside the precinct as dawn broke, bruised, exhausted, and furious. They were stronger than she'd thought, but they were also sloppy now. She checked her phone. A new message waited, from an unknown number. "You forced our hand. Now we force yours." Mara looked up at the rising sun and felt the weight of the decision settle fully. She could stop, or she could finish it. And finishing it meant breaking the rules that had kept her safe. She stood slowly, straightened her jacket, and walked back inside. This wasn't a beat cop's case anymore, and she was done pretending it was.
The city didn't explode when the warehouse incident leaked. It flinched. News vans gathered outside the industrial corridor, reporters speculating loudly while saying very little of substance. Officials held brief press conferences filled with non-answers. Words like ongoing investigation and isolated incident floated through the air like fog. But behind closed doors, people were scrambling. Mara felt it immediately. Her name started appearing in places it hadn't before, whispered in hallways, mentioned carefully in emails that never quite said what they meant. For the first time since Riley's auto repair, no one was pretending she wasn't involved. They just weren't sure what to do with her. She was pulled off patrol the next morning. No explanation, no paperwork, just a quiet directive to report to an unused office on the 3rd floor and wait. The room smelled like dust and old carpet. A desk sat against one wall, its surface bare except for a phone that didn't ring. Hours passed. Mara didn't move. She'd learned long ago that patience unsettled people more than protest. When the door finally opened, it wasn't internal affairs. It was Detective Lena Ortez. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it. "They're fighting," she said, "not about you, about who gets blamed." Mara exhaled slowly. "Anyone talking?" Ortez nodded. "One of the guards, the one you tackled. He's scared now." "Why?" "Because they left him behind." That mattered. Fear loosened tongues faster than loyalty ever could. They moved him before anyone could change their mind. A windowless interrogation room in a precinct across the river. Neutral territory. Cameras working, 2 officers who weren't on anyone's payroll watching through the glass. Mara didn't sit at the table at first. She stood against the wall, arms folded, letting the silence stretch. The man avoided her eyes. "You know why you're here," she said eventually. He laughed weakly. "No, I know why I'm not where I'm supposed to be." "Which is?" "Gone," he replied. Mara pulled out a photo from her jacket and slid it across the table, a still from Eli Navarro's video.
the serpent visible behind the men. "You worked for them," she said. "You protected shipments, cleaned up mistakes." He swallowed. "I didn't choose the clients." "No," Mara agreed. "You chose the paycheck." Silence again. Ortiz watched through the glass, heart pounding. This was the moment. If he shut down now, the case would fold back in on itself. "What happens to the people who talk?" he asked quietly. Mara met his gaze. "Eventually, they get used." "That's not comforting." "No," she said, "but it's honest." Something shifted then. The man leaned back in his chair, eyes closing briefly, like he was finally tired of holding everything in. "They call it the crown, not the serpent. That's just the symbol." "Who's they?" "People who don't touch the product, don't get their hands dirty. They move routes, decide who gets protected." "And who answers to them?" He smiled bitterly. "Everyone." Names started coming out slowly. Contractors, inspectors, city officials who never visited the docks but signed off on everything that passed through them. Mara wrote nothing down. She didn't need to. Then he said the name she'd been bracing for. Rowan Blake. The room felt suddenly smaller. "He doesn't run it," he added quickly. "He manages the mess, keeps things smooth when problems top up." Ortiz swore under her breath behind the glass. Mara felt something hollow open in her chest, but she didn't let it show. "Proof," she said. The man nodded. "I can give you routes, accounts, times he stepped in." That was enough. By the time the interrogation ended, the machine was finally bleeding. Quietly. Dangerously. The fallout was immediate. Blake didn't show up for work the next day. His phone went straight to voicemail. His house was empty. An APB was quietly drafted and quietly stalled. Someone upstairs was still trying to slow it down, but the dam had cracked. Mara wasn't sent back to patrol. She wasn't suspended either. She was left in limbo, which told her more than any formal decision ever could. Ortiz met her that night in the same diner. "They can't ignore this anymore," Ortiz said, "but they're going to try to control it." "How?" Mara asked. "By cutting you out." Mara nodded. She'd expected that. "They'll hand it to a task force, federal oversight, clean faces. And me?" Ortiz studied her. "You're the problem. You're too close." Mara didn't argue. She was too close, and she wasn't backing off. That night, she returned to the docks one last time as a beat cop. She walked the length of Pier 9, the water dark and indifferent beneath her, the place where Ortega had died, the place where everything had started. She didn't feel closure, she felt resolve. Her phone buzzed as she turned back toward her car. A message from an unknown number. "You don't get promoted for this, you get buried." Mara typed one word in reply. "Watch me." She slid the phone into her pocket and drove away, knowing the next move wouldn't be hers. The case was finally too big and too loud. The city had one last chance to decide what it was going to protect.
The task force announcement came quietly. No press conference, no speeches. Just an internal memo circulated before dawn, stamped with enough authority to end conversations before they started. Federal oversight, joint jurisdiction, a clean handover, on paper. Mara read the email on her phone while standing in line for coffee, the words blurring slightly as the meaning settled in. She wasn't named anywhere in it. Not reassigned, not credited, not included. She wasn't even mentioned. By the time she reached the precinct, the tone had shifted completely. Officers spoke in clipped sentences. Supervisors moved with sudden purpose. People who had avoided her for weeks now avoided her harder, like proximity alone might be dangerous. Ortiz found her near the lockers. "They're freezing you out," Ortiz said quietly, effective immediately. Mara nodded. "Expected." "They don't want you anywhere near interviews or evidence." "Also expected." Ortiz studied her face. "You okay?" Mara considered the question, then shook her head once. No, but I'm not done. That answer mattered. The first public crack came that afternoon. A reporter leaked part of the interrogation transcript, just enough to spark interest. No names, no conclusions, just references to protected shipments and internal obstruction. The city reacted like it always did, with denial. Officials called it misinformation, unverified sources, rogue speculation. The task force promised transparency while quietly locking everything down. Mara watched it unfold from the sidelines, officially on administrative hold pending review. She was told to surrender her badge and service weapon temporarily. She did, but she didn't surrender her memory. That night, her apartment building lost power. Not the whole block, just her building. Mara stood at her window, looking out at the lit streets below, and felt the weight of isolation settle in. Her phone had no signal. The hallway was dark and silent. Someone knocked. 3 sharp taps. Mara didn't answer. She waited. The knock came again, slower this time. "Mara," a voice called softly. "It's me." She recognized it. Rowan Blake. Her heart hammered once, hard. She moved quietly to the door and spoke without opening it. "You shouldn't be here." "I know. That's why I am." She didn't move. "I didn't build it, but I kept it running." Mara closed her eyes. "I told myself I was preventing worse things, keeping it contained." "And how many people died while you were containing it?" she asked. Silence. "I can fix this, but not if they think I've turned." Mara laughed softly, without humor. "You already did." Another pause. "They're going to scapegoat you. You know that." "I know." "They'll say you went rogue, that you fabricated evidence." "I know." Blake's voice dropped. "Then let me help you." Mara opened the door, just enough to see him standing there, older than she remembered, smaller somehow. "Start talking," she said. He did. Names, accounts, meetings, the real structure behind the crown, how decisions were made, how problems were erased. Mara recorded everything. When Blake finished, he looked exhausted. "They won't forgive me for this." "They won't forgive either of us," Mara replied. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Blake nodded. "Then we're out of time." He left through the stairwell. Mara didn't see him again. The next morning, Blake was found dead in his car. Official ruling, suicide. The city accepted it immediately. Mara didn't. Neither did Ortiz. The task force moved faster after that. Raids began quietly. Bank accounts were frozen. Contractors disappeared from public life. Still, no one spoke Mara's name. Until Ortiz did. She leaked the recording. Not all of it, just enough. Blake's voice, specific details, internal coordination. The story broke wide open. This time, the city couldn't flinch. They panicked. Press conferences multiplied. Officials contradicted themselves. The task force announced arrests without naming names. Mara was summoned to testify, not as a suspect, as a witness. She walked into the hearing room without a badge, without a weapon, wearing plain clothes. The room was packed. Cameras everywhere. She told the story simply. What she saw, what she followed, what was erased. She didn't speculate. She didn't accuse. She let the truth do the damage. When she finished, the room was silent. The task force took over completely after that. Mara walked out of the building into daylight that felt unfamiliar. She didn't know what came next, but she knew one thing. They couldn't bury her anymore. The city woke up angry. Not confused, not curious. Angry. Sirens cut through the morning air in overlapping waves as coordinated raids unfolded across Harbor City. Warehouses were sealed, offices were emptied, homes and quiet neighborhoods filled with shouting and the sound of doors breaking open. The task force moved fast now. No hesitation, no half measures. They had warrants, they had money trails, they had testimony. And they had something more dangerous than any of it: momentum. Mara watched the first reports come in from a diner television, coffee untouched in front of her. Faces she recognized, men who'd smiled through inspections, who'd shaken hands at charity events, were led out in handcuffs. No commentary, no excuses, just consequences. Ortiz sat across from her, eyes fixed on the screen. "It's bigger than we thought," she said quietly. Mara nodded. It always is. Throughout the day, the city unraveled itself. Contractors vanished from websites. Company names were stripped from buildings overnight. Officials resigned in carefully worded statements that admitted nothing and explained less. But explanations didn't matter anymore. Proof did. A midday press conference changed everything. The task force confirmed the existence of a long-running smuggling and money laundering operation tied to port infrastructure. They avoided the word cartel, but everyone heard it anyway. They announced multiple arrests and promised more. A reporter asked the question no one had wanted to say out loud: how did this go on for so long without detection? The official hesitated. Mara leaned back in her booth. The answer was already written into the city's bones. That evening, Ortiz got the call. "They want you," she said to Mara. "Both of us." "Officially?" Mara asked. Ortiz nodded. Briefing. Closed door. They met in a federal building that smelled like fresh paint and impatience. Men and women in dark suits filled the room, eyes sharp, expressions guarded. A wall of screens showed maps of shipping routes, photos of seized assets, timelines stretching back years. Mara stood quietly at the edge until someone finally addressed her. "You're Officer Hale," a man said, reading from a tablet. "Or former officer?" "Administrative hold," Mara replied evenly. He looked up. "You started this." Mara didn't correct him. They asked her to walk through it again, from Riley's auto repair to the docks, from the symbol to the ledger, from Eli Navarro to Rowan Blake. She spoke plainly. No emotion, no embellishment. When she finished, the room stayed silent longer than was comfortable. "You should have been stopped," one woman finally said. "Yes," Mara agreed. "I tried to be." That landed. The next wave hit harder. Arrests expanded beyond the docks. City procurement offices, port authority executives, inspectors who'd signed off on thousands of shipments without ever opening a container. The serpent symbol began appearing in the news, plastered across screens and headlines, like it had been hiding in plain sight all along. People were furious. They demanded answers. They demanded accountability. They demanded names. The city gave them some. Not all, but enough. That night, Mara returned to Pier 9. She hadn't planned to. Her feet just took her there. The water was calm, reflecting the city lights in broken patterns. Police tape fluttered in the breeze, a temporary boundary that wouldn't last. She stood where Luis Ortega died and closed her eyes. "You weren't invisible," she said quietly. "They just didn't want to see you." Her phone buzzed. A message from Ortiz. They're reopening Ortega's case, officially. Mara exhaled slowly. The following day, Internal Affairs closed her file. No apology, no explanation. Just a status update. Cleared. She was summoned back to the precinct that afternoon. This time, no one avoided her. Some nodded, some looked away, some stared openly. The captain waited in his office, expression unreadable. "You put us in an impossible position," he said once she sat.
"Yes, sir." He sighed. "You also forced us to confront something we'd been ignoring." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a badge. Detective Shield. Not official yet, not announced, but real. "We can't promote you today. Politics, optics, timing." He continued. Mara closed the folder gently. "But soon," he added. "Very soon." Mara stood to leave, the weight of the moment settling over her like exhaustion. Outside, the city buzzed with a nervous energy she'd never felt before. Something had broken, something irreversible. And for the first time since this began, Mara allowed herself to believe it might actually end. Her phone buzzed one last time that night. Unknown number. No threats this time, just a single line. "It's over." Mara looked out at the city skyline and replied with 2 words. "It is now."
The city didn't heal overnight. It didn't pretend to either. In the weeks that followed the raids, Harbor City moved like a place waking up from a long, uneasy sleep. Court documents replaced headlines. Mugshots replaced press conferences. The serpent symbol disappeared from walls and docks, scrubbed away so thoroughly it left pale scars where it once stood. But the damage lingered. Trials began quietly. Some defendants pleaded out. Others fought, dragging their names through months of testimony that peeled back layer after layer of corruption. Inspectors admitted they'd signed what they were told to sign. Contractors confessed to moving cargo they never inspected. City officials resigned before subpoenas reached their desks. A few tried to disappear. Most failed. Mara followed the proceedings from a distance. She wasn't assigned to the task force, not officially, not yet. She sat in the back of courtrooms, listened to testimony she'd already memorized, and watched the city confront the cost of its silence. Luis Ortega's case was reopened. This time, it didn't close quietly. A medical examiner revised the cause of death. New witnesses came forward. Old security footage resurfaced, recovered from backups no one had thought to check. His family attended every hearing. Mara didn't speak to them. She didn't need to. The truth spoke loudly enough now. The department changed slowly, painfully. Policies were rewritten. Oversight committees formed. Training sessions mandated. People who had once avoided Mara now asked her careful questions, as if proximity to the truth had become something to respect. Others still resented her. She accepted that. Not everyone wanted the city better. Some had simply learned how fragile their protection really was. Detective Lena Ortiz was reassigned to major crimes within a month. No ceremony, no announcement, just a quiet move that spoke volumes. "You coming with me?" Ortiz asked one night over coffee. "Not yet," Mara replied. Ortiz smiled. "They won't keep you waiting long." Mara returned to patrol for a short time. The streets felt different now. Not safer, just more honest. People looked at her longer. Some recognized her. Some thanked her. Others crossed the street. She kept working the same way she always had, listening more than talking, watching more than reacting. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the city in amber light, she was called into the captain's office. This time, the door was already open. The captain stood when she entered. So did 2 people she didn't expect, a representative from the task force and the deputy chief. The folder on the desk was thicker than the last one. "Officer Hale," then he corrected himself, "Detective Hale." Mara felt the words land slowly, like they needed time to exist. "For exceptional investigative initiative, integrity under pressure, and service beyond the scope of duty, you are hereby promoted to detective, effective immediately." He slid the badge across the desk. This one wasn't provisional. This one was earned. Mara picked it up carefully, the metal cool and solid in her hand.
She didn't smile, she didn't speak, she didn't need to. Outside the office, the precinct buzzed as usual. Phones rang, officers passed by, life continued, but something fundamental had shifted. Later that night, Mara walked the docks one last time, not as a beat cop, not as a ghost in the system, but as someone who finally belonged where the answers lived. Pier 9 was quiet. The water moved gently beneath the boards, reflecting the city lights in slow, steady ripples. The concrete had been repaved where Ortega died. No symbol remained, no carving, no mark. But Mara remembered. She rested her hand on the railing and let the moment pass. This case hadn't made her fearless, it had made her certain. Back at home, she placed the detective badge on her kitchen table beside the old notebook, the one she'd never turned in, never destroyed. It stayed there as a reminder, not of victory, of responsibility. Her phone buzzed once more before she turned in for the night. A message from Ortiz. Ready for the next one? Mara typed back without hesitation, always. She turned off the light and let the city hum carry her into silence. Some stories end with justice, others end with vigilance, because in cities like Harbor City, the dark never disappears completely, it just waits. Some cases don't begin with gunshots or headlines, they begin with silence, with a door left unlocked, with a question no one wants answered. Mara Hale asked it anyway, and because she did, a city was forced to look at itself. If you enjoyed this Midnight Casefile, remember to like, subscribe, and share the story. More cases are waiting, just beyond the dark.